everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of The County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. We are pleased and privileged to end our season this year with a conversation with Senator Mike Lee. Senator, good to see you. It's been a while since we've had a one-on-one.
It's good to see you again.
And a lot of stuff has happened since we've talked. Well, I would like to start this conversation and get right into it, talking about the whole issue of public lands transfer. The state of Utah has passed House Bill 148, and the surrounding states are in the process of passing very similar legislation, and there is a movement that has been taking foot. What can happen at the federal level to assist this process? And I would preface that by saying at a rural summit recently, a radio commentator from Salt Lake City basically said, this public lands transfer is crazy talk. Do you see it as crazy talk, or is there a real legitimate constitutional push for this?
Well, what I think is crazy is the fact that we've got one landowner owning 2/3 of our land in one state. That landowner, being a sovereign government, the United States of America, declares itself exempt from taxation, and as a result, our communities can't rely on the property tax revenue that would otherwise come from that land. They can't rely on the economic development that would otherwise occur on that land. And I think that's a problem. So I think what's crazy is for us to do nothing about it and to continue to allow hardworking Utahns who are hurt by this in a very real, very tangible way to have no avenue for relief. So I commend those who were behind this legislative effort, and I want to do everything I can to support them.
You know, back in the 1800s, it was a Missouri senator that actually got the ball moving on the Midwestern states to have that same constitutional promise fulfilled. It was Senator Benton. Does it need a push from the federal side to make this not just a sagebrush rebellion of 20 years ago?
I think it does, and I think we need not just one Senator Benton for today, but I think we need a lot of them. I think we need a lot of people in the U.S. Senate and in the U.S. House who are willing to explain, especially to those representing eastern states who don't understand federal land issues, what's really at stake here. See, there's a big misperception out there in the public, especially when you get east of the Rocky Mountains when it comes to federal public land. People tend to think of federal public land and national parks as the same thing, and they're not. National parks do consist of public land, but there's a whole lot more to it. Most of our federal public land does not consist of a national park or a wilderness area. It just consists of a whole lot of land that's owned by the federal government that sits there and can be used basically only subject to federal approval. And that has created a lot of problems. So I think there are things that we can do, and one of the things that I've tried to do is to build awareness among my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, about the very real consequences that our communities face as a result of this problem, and point out to them that if nothing else, we ought to make sure that the federal government fully funds the PILT program, the Payment in Lieu of Taxes program, so that it pays the rough equivalent of what it would be paying as an actual taxpayer if it were to own that land, if it were a private owner. If it were to pay some rough approximation of that, then at least our local governments would be held harmless from the most devastating effects of this massive federal land ownership.
Well, while we've gone down that road, you know, there's some real concern. I mean, some mortifying concern with the local county commissioners across the state that PILT's not even going to come forward this next year. I know that the sequestration is looking at maybe a 5% curtailment, but they're worried if it's even going to fund at all. And this is, particularly at budget time right now, is really weighing on them heavily. Is there a chance that it may not be funded at all next year?
Well, look, when the government giveth, the government taketh away. And the whole idea of PILT was a good one, payment in lieu of taxes. But in practice, it has been, we will pay you what we feel like paying based on what we feel like we reasonably can pay or have to pay. It's not any effort to roughly approximate the actual tax-assessed value of the land and to pay a tax equivalent on that basis. And it needs to change to that. And so, yeah, I am worried about that. And that's yet another problem with this amount of land being owned by the federal government. If any other person or entity owned that much land, we'd be really concerned. And we should be no less concerned when that owner is not a private corporation or an individual or a nonprofit foundation, but a sovereign government.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back with more of our conversation with Senator Mike Lee.
Kanab, base camp for your southern Utah adventures. You belong in Kanab.
Carbon County is typically known for its industry and coal production. But did you know Utah's Castle Country has something for everyone? The motocross track has been acclaimed as the most popular in Utah, with a variety of technical and natural terrain. And it even includes a pee-wee track. Visit castlecountry.com for more information.
Rediscover your sense of adventure by attending the 16th Annual Bluff International Balloon Festival, January 17th through the 19th in Bluff, Utah. Visit us for some of the most beautiful, unencumbered red rock flying in the Southwest. Utah's San Juan County, where life is elevated.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're talking with Senator Mike Lee, the junior senator from the state of Utah, who's actually not so much a junior anymore. At 3 years, you've certainly made a name for yourself, and you know, some of it good, and some of it has probably been a little bit of a challenge for you. But I don't see any black eyes, so I guess you're doing all right.
That's right. The hairline's receding, but I'm otherwise intact.
I would like to talk about some specific land issues, and we've got to start on this. And you know, RS 2477, which you've been a big champion of, has kind of moved to the back with public lands transfer, but we're starting to see some of these restrictive policies come back around. Recently, the Richfield RMP, the Resource Management Plan, has to be re-looked at after they spent 8 years figuring out what they were going to do for the next 20. We get into it like 4 years, and they say, well, you know what? We just didn't look at enough stuff, and we have to reanalyze that. And they promised that this was the beginning of an iceberg, and that, or the tip of an iceberg, and things were going to continue to happen. What are your thoughts on this rework of the RMP?
The whole idea of a resource management plan is to put in place a set of expectations that people can have, especially at the local level, about how land within the region can be used. And so after you spend the better part of a decade carefully analyzing and scrutinizing every possible outcome, and then you go back after the fact and say, never mind, that wasn't good. You undermine the whole process. You undermine FLPMA and the system that it's set in place to guarantee that we would have access to our federal public lands for multiple use. So I think this is a real step backward. I think this is a real unfortunate occurrence, and I think it's something that will ultimately hurt the hardworking men and women of the lands affected within that. I think it's a shame, and it illustrates the larger problem of having this much land owned by any one institution, especially the federal government.
Well, the counties involved in this feel that they were legitimate stakeholders according to FLPMA, and that the industries that use those public lands were legitimate stakeholders. The environmental community was also one of those stakeholders, but then they've come back around and triggered this whole thing by threatening litigation. Is there something wrong with that system?
Well, yeah, I think there is. And first of all, you're right. Under FLPMA, the entities that you mentioned are legitimate stakeholders. But apparently some are more legitimate than others. If one group of those stakeholders can go around and wage a collateral attack on the outcome after it's already been supposedly set in stone. So I think that's a problem, and I think it does not bode well for future negotiations in connection with future RMPs. And I think it also bodes ill for those who would otherwise be inclined to invest in our state, to invest in the people here and in the resources available to us here as Utahns. They're going to be more reluctant to invest in that in the future, knowing that even after a decision's made, it may not be final, and in fact, it probably won't.
Well, along those same lines, you know, we're in a boil right now because of the November 19th BLM lease. It was 144,000 acres that was put on the, that was scheduled to be on the auction block based on requests of exploration people. At the last minute, they withheld 100,000 acres. They didn't even communicate with the counties about it and put 44,000 up. The BLM says that they were worried about cultural concerns that had come up, things involving the old Spanish Trail. Is this not a good faith effort as far as the BLM is concerned, in your opinion?
First of all, we have to keep in mind that it's not just a few companies that are hurt by this. Those oil companies or anyone else who might be investing, they're just one piece of the bigger picture. The bigger picture that I'm most worried about includes those hardworking Utahns who would otherwise have had access to good jobs, who would otherwise have had access to the revenue and the great things that could be done with that revenue as it came into these local communities, many of which are really suffering, and in many cases suffering as a result of bad federal land management policies already in place prior to this decision. This decision demonstrates that this administration, like other administrations before this one, is not in a good position to be able to claim that they are superior managers of our lands in Utah.
Yeah, but you're hurting the environment as well, and that's what most of these decisions are, is to protect the environment.
And my response to that is absolute nonsense. Look, the best environmentalists are the people who live closest to the land. Ranchers, hunters, recreation enthusiasts, those are true environmentalists. Those are the people who actually live close to this land. They don't want the land to be dirtied. They don't want the air to be polluted. They want to protect it, and they want to protect it in a way that also preserves their interests. Those are the people who ought to be making decisions about how best to protect the land, not government bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.
Well, that would kind of tie into the issue of sage grouse, because the state put forward a plan that at one point the U.S. Fish and Wildlife said, hey, this is a good plan. This is how things should look. And they took into mitigation effects wildfires, they took in grazing, and they thought, well, we need to be better managers of grazing because grazing actually improves the habitat for the sage grouse. And as we now move forward, we find that they've kind of backtracked on that grazing. It looks like there's an attempt to push grazing off of public lands, and the ranchers are saying that will lead to more catastrophic wildfires.
That's right. And this is yet another demonstration of the fact that a lot of these decisions are based far more on political considerations and key constituencies that are good for the liberal fundraising base than they are on sound science. If we were to base these decisions on sound science, then we would end up with a habitat preservation plan that would look much more similar to what has been proposed quite reasonably by people in the state of Utah. And that's what we need to remain focused on, is the fact that the people who are best equipped to preserve the environment and to protect species like the sage grouse are the people right here in the state of Utah.
Did we learn any lessons from the government shutdown and the fact that the state ponied up and said, you know what, we'll pay if you'll open up those parks? Was there a lesson learned there?
Absolutely, without question. Look, when we saw that happening, we saw that people at the state and the local level have the greatest stake in those lands and in keeping them open and in keeping them accessible to the American people. And we should therefore be more inclined to trust state and local officials with the management of those lands, for the most part, than we are federal officials. When we politicize federal land management policy, and when we have this much federal land under federal ownership, we're talking about roughly 1/3 of the land in the United States and 2/3 of the land in the state of Utah, bad things happen. When we play politics with the American people, hardworking men and women, middle income earners and lower income earners get hurt the most. And that's what I'm most worried about, and that's why this government shutdown only serves to underscore the fact that we should be less inclined to trust the management of 2/3 of our state to people who have no connection with our state whatsoever.
Do you think that we've demonstrated that we can actually run lands better? I mean, did the government shutdown show that we were able to do that as a state?
I think it did. It gave us an opportunity where we had state and local officials stepping forward saying, look, we're happy to manage this. I wish we had had an opportunity to actually do it. Unfortunately, the federal government sort of swooped in and took that over. But regardless, it showed that we have a strong interest in doing that. It also showed the real dangers of putting this much land ownership in the hands of the few, in the hands of the federal government, because it can be used quite easily as a political football, as a political weapon. one that is particularly potent in states like ours, where most of the land is owned by the federal government, and that's wrong.
Well, we'll continue our conversation with Senator Mike Lee after a commercial break, and we've got a lot on the agenda to cover coming up on the county seat.
Get ready, set, jump. The day starts off at sunrise with the Cisco Disco. Come catch Cisco fish at Cisco Beach on the east side of Bear Lake. After the fishing, why not jump in the lake yourself? The Bear Lake Monster Polar Plunge starts at 11 a.m. at the Bear Lake State Park Arena. All proceeds from the event go to Primary Children's Medical Center. Gather your family and head north for a great cause. Visit bearlake.org for more information. Rich County, take the plunge.
The Morgan Area Chamber of Commerce presents 50 Things to Do in Morgan, the Browning Outlet Store. Browning clothes and other hunting gear at outlet prices. Snow skiing. Snow Basin is a world-class resort offering great terrain, breathtaking vistas, and that famous Utah powder. Photography of trains, scenery, and wildlife. Come see why Morgan, with its rustic train bridges and abundant wildlife, is a destination for photographers. Sledding. Morgan has lots of great hills and soft powder. Ice fishing. Morgan has 2 great reservoirs to fish, East Canyon and Lost Creek. Old Time Christmas. An old-fashioned hometown Christmas celebration complete with the largest nativity in Utah. To learn more or find more activities in Morgan, visit gomorgan.org. Morgan County, easy to work, healthy to live.
Welcome back to the county seat. Our conversation today with Senator Mike Lee, and in the break it's been a little more lighthearted. You know, you kind of have a reputation in the press of being a very serious-minded senator, but you do have a chance to have a little bit of fun, I see.
I do from time to time, yeah.
You have to keep that a trade secret, though, right?
Well, yeah, but you also have to have fun a little now and then, or else you'll go crazy in Washington, because Washington can be a frustrating
place. A very
place.
crazy place. I'd like to talk about water. That continues to be a big issue in the West. Many people have said that water is the gold of the next century, and there are big issues with water. There has been pressure put on by the Forest Service for leaseholders and people with grazing allotments to, if they want to renew their leases, that they have to give up water rights. And some of the central Utah counties have had this come up. Some people have given in to it. Other ranchers have taken a stand and held their ground. Is that within the right of the Forest Service to capture control of the water that originates on their land?
No, I don't think so, and I think it's an especially inappropriate thing for them to do when putting that down as a condition for continuing contractual relationships that have existed for decades. In other words, to say, yeah, we've had this arrangement for a long time and we're going to allow it to continue, but only if you hand over something that you own independently of this, that isn't tied to this. It really doesn't have anything to do with this, but I'm going to make you give me that thing anyway. Here, we're talking about water rights. And I think that's wrong. I don't think they ought to do that. I think that's yet another abuse of power that we've seen by federal land managers.
And let's talk about other water issues, because it looks as if somewhere between the Army Corps of Engineers, who have jurisdiction over navigable waters, are extending or trying to extend their reach by saying that if it's a tributary and it flows into their waters, they have jurisdiction over it because they're now responsible for water quality according to the EPA. Is that a defensible position?
I think it's a position that is dangerous, and I think that this has become a question. The question was highlighted in the 2006 Supreme Court Rapanos case. And several members of the Senate and I have been concerned about this. Rand Paul and I, along with a few others, have talked about and worked toward creating some legislation that would clarify these definitions. Look, we all know that navigable waters were not ever intended by anyone and could never be reasonably interpreted to encompass something like a dry wash. That is not a navigable waterway. And we need to be able to come to some consensus about conclusions as simple as that one. Not all of these questions can be answered simply and easily, but I think that one can. A dry wash is not a navigable waterway, and we need to make that clear by law rather than allowing it perpetually to be invented and defined and then reinvented and redesigned by federal bureaucrats who are completely immune from the political process.
Is part of that the fault of your colleagues in both houses, because they've left too much to be filled in on a regulatory basis instead of delineating it in the law?
Sure. Look, there's always a temptation when too many politicians are governed first and foremost by the desire for perpetual re-election. There's always going to be a temptation for them to vote for a lot of legislation that speaks in very broad, general terms that nobody disputes. We shall have clean air. And then the EPA gets to decide what clean air is, what happens to polluters, and it also gets to enforce those same rules. You're essentially outsourcing the lawmaking function. You're not making legislation, you're making legislators. You're making legislators out of people who, however well-educated and well-intentioned they may be, are not ever subject to elections. And that's the problem with excessive delegation of legislative authority. And it's a big problem we've got in Washington. That's why I support the REINS Act, which would say that for all major rules, the regulation in question can't take effect unless or until both houses of Congress have passed it into law and it's been signed into law by the President.
Do you think that law is, do you think it's doable?
It's doable. It has passed the House of Representatives this year and last year. This year, as last year, it's been languishing in the Senate. But you know, we've got a few Democrats who I think can vote for it and have expressed an interest in it and support for it. And there's no reason why Democrats shouldn't support this. This is an idea that's neither Democratic nor Republican. It's neither liberal nor conservative. It's simply American. It's to make sure that those who make the laws are accountable to the people they serve.
And we'll be back after this short commercial break with our one-on-one conversation with Senator Mike Lee. Stay with us.
Almost 45% of the oil produced in Utah, 7.8 million barrels, comes from Duchesne County. That oil feeds our state economy, provides job growth, and supports local business. Here in Duchesne County, we're working to make Utah an economic, cultural, and technological leader. Whether you're here for business or pleasure, Duchesne County will welcome you with open arms and invite you to explore all the beauty of the Uinta Mountains. Duchesne County, close enough for business, far enough to get away.
Who is it?
I'm here to see my grandbaby.
Well, did you get your whooping cough booster shot? You can't see the baby without it.
Well,
Your other option is on the porch.
Find out where you can get vaccinated at stopwhoopingcough.org.
Welcome back to the county seat. Our conversation with Senator Mike Lee. You know, I'm just sitting here looking, and I kind of alluded to it, but you know, with the government shutdown and everything, your eyes don't look too blackened, but you took a little bit of a beating there. Sure. What are your thoughts in retrospect at looking at that standoff with the Senate, the legislature, and the president?
Well, you know, I still think it's unfortunate that the president chose, rather deliberately, to shut down the government rather than to compromise, rather than to negotiate in good faith. He didn't do that. On July 2nd, he unconstitutionally revised, rewrote, amended Obamacare. He has no power to do that constitutionally or statutorily. He said he was doing it because the law wasn't ready to be implemented. And so I pointed out, look, especially if the president says it's not ready to be implemented, and especially if the president's going to try to usurp constitutional powers that don't belong to him, we shouldn't be funding it. And perhaps more to the point, I wanted Obamacare to be funded or not funded on its own merits and not on the merits of defense spending, cancer research, national parks management, or anything else in government. Obamacare ought to be able to stand on its own merits if it's going to be funded. Unfortunately, the president refused to negotiate with us, refused to allow us to fund anything in government unless we were willing to fund everything in government, including Obamacare. That was not good faith negotiation. That was not compromise. And it was shameful what he did. It was also shameful, I think, that most of the mainstream media refused to report the true facts of what actually happened as I've described it. The more important part of all of this is what we do moving forward from the government shutdown. And I've chosen to focus on the need for a conservative reform agenda. You know, the battle that we had within the Republican Party during and leading up to the shutdown focused on a gulf that has come to exist within the Republican Party between the establishment and the sort of newer, more grassroots propelled conservatives. And I think that gap, that hole in the Republican Party is exactly the size and shape of a conservative reform agenda. I think we need to focus on not just what we're against in government, that part's also necessary, but we also need to focus on what we're for. We need to focus on legislative solutions that will enhance the security and the economic mobility of the American people, particularly those who are struggling in the middle class and those who are trying to work their way out of the bottom end of the economic spectrum. And so I think that conservative principles properly understood will give us these things that we're really for, ways that we can reform the tax code so that it's more friendly to hardworking American families and parents, things that will make higher education more affordable, and things that will make us freer and more able to enjoy the prosperity that this country has to offer.
Senator Lee, you were all about raising the interest rates on student loans. How does that make education more affordable?
Well, what I'm talking about is something that focuses not on entrenching the federal government's monopoly of the student loan industry. I think that's the wrong solution, and I continue to hold to that. What I'm saying will actually help to control the escalation of tuition in the higher education context is if we open up the accreditation process which ultimately is managed in one way or another by the federal government. If we make federal accreditation of higher education learning institutions, those that are eligible for participation in federal student loan programs, we will make higher education more available and more affordable to more people, especially those who need it.
So you basically, higher education needs a more competitive marketplace?
It does. And I think we're stuck in an old model. That's not to say that the colleges and universities of today don't do great work. They do. It's just that we've got other enterprises, online learning institutions, vocational training programs, and so forth, that are equally worthy of our federal student loan programs, and those ought to have the opportunity to participate as well.
Okay, a very short answer to this last question. You basically alluded to the fact that that conservative agenda is going to require that we focus on what we can do instead of what we're against. Do you think both sides, from the Tea Party side and from the establishment side, can look past those and make a solution that will create that agenda?
I think we can, and I want to be clear. I'm not saying that we can forget for a moment what we're against. Both aspects of this are absolutely necessary. We've got to remain opposed to those things that we oppose, but we've also got to be for something. And I think the things that we're for are things that will help us unite as a party and move forward and come out of the 2014 election cycle stronger than ever.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time on the county seat. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
We look for you to keep tuning in, because remember, local government is where your life happens. And so get involved. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.